Is it just like that?
Well, we had a few no, about 2 no, and I'm just going to follow up with them because I don't think it was intentional, just not saying. I just think there was a conflict of kind of schedules that came up that precluded them. Other members, one member moving out of state, you know.
That was
yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I just didn't know if it was, I'm just curious, I just out of curiosity, what, is it something that's, like the time, is it the, like, what can we do to help people feel good about being here?
Yeah.
How many people in the
4 for sure, and 1, I mean, like, and then 1, I'm not quite sure. She hasn't responded back to me, so I don't know if it's kind of like she's out of office or something happened, so I'm not quite sure.
Are these people that originally accepted?
Yeah. And I also don't know if it's kind of like, we have this weird holiday schedule, and like we're having a meeting butted up against, a major traveling kind of holiday, so definitely just kind of taking that into consideration. So hopefully just kind of re-engaging as many people as possible until they give me the official, like, I can no longer attend, and then we can, proceed as appropriate. So, yeah.
How many people do we have?
Here. Seven, 12. Yeah. So we're retaining quite a good bunch. So
Yeah,
no sadness. Okay. So for the next portion of the first section, we're going to have an opportunity to look at the equity lens. And I have copies here. Did anyone else grab a copy of the Oregon Equity Lens? Thank you.
Thank you.
And everyone else on the phone, it was emailed out as well. The Oregon Equity Lens, like I said earlier, kind of consists of 3 portions. Kind of the vision and mission and the preamble. Then we have the middle portion on page 5, I believe, that we're most commonly, I think, associated with, like kind of the 8 questions that we're posing when you're looking at different items. And then last but not least, there's a definition portion to define some terms that is utilized throughout the entire lens to provide some points of clarification. So for this particular activity, I wanted people to break up into groups of 2, and it kind of works out very well. Yay! So we're going to go through the first portion of the So we're going to go through the first we're going to read the first page and a half right before we get to the belief sections. And as you're reading that, I just want you to underline, highlight anything that kind of stands out to you, whether that stands out to you or that you have questions about, because I want us to go kind of have a really in-depth look at this, because this is, this guides all of our work stated through our charge within this committee. So if you can take an opportunity to do that. Mr. Julie, I already read this. See, you can provide additional background information by phone call.
And I really, really like it. Remember correctly that they asked some high school students were asked to look at this too, and yeah, because I'm trying to remember, and that I thought was really powerful when they had input.
Lillian, this is Terry. I can't hear Eva. Could you ever get closer to the phone? Sorry for that.
Sorry, I just asked if I was remembering correctly that that a group of high school students had been asked to look at the equity lens and give input on it, because I thought that that had been a pretty powerful statement when they gave their input. One of the microphones like will it reach? It should. I almost just crawled under the do it.
And then you're like, oh wait, we're reading.
Arlene, yes. I'm early, so I apologize. I'm going to be hanging up now.
Okay. Bye, Marlene.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.
So Eva, does anybody have that document or any minutes of it where the high school students looked at the equity lens? Because that would be, I'd be interested in seeing that.
Yeah, I don't remember when that was. It was several years ago.
It was a couple of years ago, and I'm sure it's probably in someone's archive file somewhere.
Well, I can do some background research to see if anyone has it, because if it was at or if the students were talking at an official meeting, there should be some form of minutes or a recording of it.
I can't remember if it was students reporting back or if we just got a report from the input they had given.
Yeah, because they actually, quite a few people, individuals and organizations provided feedback, because I know my organization, Additional Media and all that, provided to me, several staff at Education Northwest also provided feedback. Or actually not at all, we all funneled it into one person and sent one document, so it might be in that format.
Well, yeah, definitely I'll check into that to see if there's any archival information around that. That would be interesting to see as well. So hopefully you had an opportunity to read or kind of review the preamble. So what were some of the things that were that was calling to you as you were reading the preamble? And also just to state some of the terminology or the names of organizations are old, so with the second revamping of this document, they'll change that as well.
I think the statement, we understand that the success of every child and learner in Oregon is directly tied to the prosperity of all Oregonians. So that idea has really progressed in the last couple of decades away from that we're like raising people up as individuals for that individual's purpose, but that also that raising every individual benefits all of us.
I highlighted that same statement, and why it resonates for me is that this recent House Bill 2016 that was passed to provide advice to the department on how to, impact the dismal statistics related to academics and African American students. But I just remember when the few of us who actually decided to take this on, there was, not the kind of sense of urgency in the legislature. And it wasn't until we presented all the statistics, the data, that the response was very different. It said, oh, this is an emergency. This is something that we need to pay attention to. And so that, to me, that's basically what it is. If you look at students who are not being successful, and you have a persistent pattern of that lack of success, and some of it is tied to inequitable access, it's tied to some of the expectations, lower expectations, then you must look at how do we change this. And it's not going to change magically by just saying, oh, we've got to change this. You know, some of it, you know, really does require resources. And so I think that this particular document has really began to impact the way that people are beginning to look at how do we improve systems in the state for all children. And when we say all children, then we have to look at, now if we look at the group of all, then we need to look within that group and see which children in that group are at the greatest disadvantage and target those resources. And that's really what equity is all about, providing each child what they need to be successful.
Yeah, I underlined sufficient resource is available. That was the piece in it for me, because a lot of times there's talk about equity, there's talk about reform, but there's not the equitable allocation of resources to go along with it and make it happen. So that's the part that really stood out for me.
And the line that stood out to me on page 2 is we believe that one of our most critical responsibilities going forward is to implement a set of concrete criteria and policies in order to reverse this trend and deliver the best educational continuum and educational outcomes to Oregon's children. And kind of piggybacking on what Ms. Joyce said, we have to, again, like within the state of Oregon, if we're looking at all children, and if we're looking at like the population of children, and if we're trying to target resources, and it's not around, like, they're not, we can't consider them statistically insignificant because the population is small. Because let's say the African American population in Oregon is like 2%. However, if we're digging down deeper, we're looking at like impacting our students of color, bilingual students, and also like students with special needs and low-income students in the points of intersection of that, where it's kind of like if you have multiple of those like things intersecting at one time, your academic attainment drops even lower. So again, it's kind of like we have to also look at those key points of intersection as well, and seeing how like they're impacting our children.
This is Richard from the OA, and actually there were about 3 things that stood out to me. The first was looking at the opportunity gaps, and how the first one really is a catalyst for the second. And until we address the first, it's going to remain difficult to address the second opportunity gap. And then the third thing, those being 2, the third thing was the very last sentence, where it says, we are committed to explicitly identifying disparities in education outcomes for the purpose of targeting areas for action, intervention, and investment. And in particularly those last 3 words, well, 4 with the word and, but that there be some concrete actions, that there be effective interventions, and that there be adequate investment. We know that this is going to come at a cost, but it comes at a greater cost if we do nothing.
Thank you, Richard.
Sure.
So I of course highlighted several, but I think one, which is not, thinking about it in early learning terms, you might not think of it directly, but it kind of pertains to the conversation that we've been having at the ad hoc committee on the mixed delivery preschool. So I highlighted that we believe our community colleges and university systems have a critical role in serving our diverse populations, rural communities, English language learners, and students with disabilities. Our institutions of higher education and the P20 system will truly offer the best educational experience when their campus faculty, staff, and students reflect the state, its growing diversity, and the ability for all of these populations to be educationally successful and ultimately employed.
And I think that, the reason why it jumped out to me in conjunction with the ad hoc discussions is because we've been talking about the need for access for early learning providers to be able to get professional development, and how there isn't always culturally or language-specific trainings that are available around the state, especially for English language learners.
Mm-hmm.
So that really, like, oh, hey. So it does tie back to the early learning as well.
True.
I think of it as a big continuum.
Yeah. And from just going off of that, the next portion of like the first section of this piece is the belief statement, and there's multiple beliefs. Like it's like we believe, and it's about two. That's perfectly fine. It led into what we're going to access right now. So for the next 2 pages, I want you to read the we believe statements, because again, like as we're looking at this equity lens. It does say the primary focus of the equity lens is race and ethnicity. However, that does not mean that like that magically we're not going to talk about or address other points of intersection that's impacting our children. Read the we believe section as well.
I read it. We believe as part of the preamble.
Oh, no worries.
Sorry.
And also,
I'll be sorry. Failing at school. No failing. Failing.
take another minute to find your stopping place. So from the belief section, what were some either lines or baby sentences that stood out to you?
Hi there, this is Richard. So I had a hard time with this part of it because there were so many that resonated with me that I felt like I was in church. Say that, yes. preach, you know, that kind of thing. So there were really, really good points here. One of the ones that was somewhat, that caught my attention, I'll say it that way, was the next to last one. Because in the state of Oregon, the population percentages are greatly slanted. And so I think in some ways, with there being, I think the numbers are 9% of teachers are teachers of color, that in some ways, I think it is almost a representation of the state, maybe not fully, to the numbers, complete 100% across the board. But what I think we also have to look at here is that when there's a situation where our African American community is 2%, and what have you, going forward, that there be whatever that majority piece is. Say, for example, and these are not the numbers, but say, for example, there's 80% of Caucasian or white teachers who are teaching our students, who are teaching our learners. There has to be an investment with that 80% in some sort of diversity, some sort of cultural sensitivity, some sort of cultural responsiveness, something like that. Because if we're representing the state, I think there is almost like an inherent risk there that people don't, that people don't have to necessarily go into those additional trainings because the numbers for communities of color in Oregon are so low. But in order for our learners to be successful that don't look like the teacher, I think that we need to be asking our teachers and our administration, there's a way that we have to connect with those communities, with those families, with those learners. And so I don't know if this, so in short, I don't know if this goes far or not. That's what I'm saying.
Thank you. Any additional lines?
Well, I can't select out one particular one because I look at this as a prescription for success, and I compare it to, you're supposed to take a 10-day course of antibiotics in order to get rid of whatever ails you. Right. And if you don't take all 10 days, you're not going to get the benefit. And so we can't just select out one and say, this is the one. We need to be comprehensive in our approach, and we need to look at decisions that we make and measure those up against these belief statements and look at what the impact is of each one of them, and to not try to do all of them. And I'm not saying, that you don't take all 40 antibiotics in one day. You spread them out over a 10-day period. And it's the same thing with this. But we cannot leave any of these untouched if we are going to truly impact all of our children.
Yeah.
Now, depending on how severe the issue is, you might need to take a second dose. You might need to take a little bit more of this number 7. But you really need to look at all of them within the context of improving education for all children.
And hopefully this exercise is not for us to be like, oh, we're going to be like narrowing in on these particular lines. I just thought like what's resonating with you as you're reading this piece.
Well, it's like when you look at, like even this document here, the one that we're going to be looking at, I think this gives us a framework to kind of ask ourselves, is this in alignment with our equity beliefs? And if something is missing, then we need to figure out, where do we put it into this work? And so, that's what I find myself, having to do. And it's a way of challenging ourselves and holding ourselves accountable. I mean, we have a belief statement that's statewide. And I always say that it's not just the education. Other systems need to look at these beliefs and see how they can be applied to the work that they're charged to do.
Do you feel like our council is executing these at all in any way?
Just a question.
Well,
I'm just asking because
I'm just interested because we are, we're charged with doing this work, but is it working?
I think that there's been some work to kind of show areas where it didn't work. I actually did some work for ELC where I reviewed. You familiar with that? Okay. So it was a review of a grant process, and clearly there were some. I mean, it's a public document. I don't know why I was whispering. Public document that had the equity lens been used in the RFP process, both at the point where it was created, where it was reviewed, there might have been some different outcomes. And so that was very clearly, I think, articulated in the review. And so I think that will make a difference. And I think it's guiding what will happen, through the work of this committee. So I think that is one thing, but there's still some other issues that have begun to surface, and I'm on the early childhood resource team in the House Bill 2016 advisory group. And so some of what we know and what we want to see happen are being embedded into that in terms of the recommendations that we will make to ODE. So I think people are beginning to understand that an equity lens is only as effective as the ways in which you hold people accountable for implementing them and what they do, and the way they fund, and the way they make decisions, all of that. So I think that
we're on day 2.
We're working on it. We're on day 2.
I think for me, I really like this document. I've liked it from the first time I read it. And I think the thing for me about it is that I feel like we just always have to keep reminding ourselves that it's not policy and it's not a statement, it's actually a lens. Like I like the language that you were using and talking about it, saying like, I think things would have gone better if they'd used the equity lens. Like a lens is a thing that you look through like a filter. And when we use this that way, it's really powerful. If when you're making a decision, you look at it and you think, does this do what's best for everyone? Does this meet the needs of minorities? Does this meet the needs of children especially? When you hold it in front of what the decision you're making or the document you're writing, it's really powerful. I think that when you write the policy and like kind of put the equity lens on top of it afterward, not useful. Like equity is not going to be like icing on a cake.
Right.
It's got to be
the last thing you think about.
Right. It's got to be something that we're using as we're doing it. So I think that's going to be. I could see that as being kind of a challenge in our work as a committee because we need to help people be using this as they're writing, as opposed to writing something and then giving it to us and being like, does this check? Like, can you stamp this with your equity? Stamp
equity wand.
Because that's not. Because that is not going to be.
You're right.
So.
And you have people say, oh, we didn't even think about that. If you had your lens.
What just resonated with me from what you just said was kind of when you're looking at it's a filter. It's ultimately a filter. And when you're putting on, you're taking on or putting on your glasses, like it's not what I can see right now, because right now everyone's a blob. Everyone's a blob. However, when I put these on, like I get to a view that may not be the view in which I currently hold. However, it's through utilizing the lens that I can make the decisions that will best serve the intentions of the actual document at hand. So I like the concept of a filter, which may not be your natural inclination or first decision when you are engaging in any of this work.
Things are going to shift when you look through it.
Mm-hmm. It has to.
One of the icons we always used to use was the eyeglass. You know, you talk about the lens. You had one trainer in one of the other centers that actually made some eyeglasses with some little filters in them. And, you know, just actually, how does this look different now?
Well, as I was reading, go ahead.
Hi, Terry.
One of the pieces that resonates with me, and I think mainly because of my role in early learning, and I don't see it in a lot of the document, but when we look at the piece that on the top of page 3, the second we believe, that starts to talk about it's not simply an expansion of services, it's a recognition that we need to provide services in a way that best meets the needs of our most diverse segment of the population, 0 to 5-year-olds, and their families. And that really resonates with me. I've had experiences both at the state and local level where people still believe that the focus is only on the learner and don't want to talk about the generational trauma that's occurred to these populations that have less success. Isn't just about that kid in school today. It has to do with everything their parents experienced around the education system and their grandparents and their aunts and uncles, and we really need to address that whole unit as we're moving through to make everyone more comfortable with the education system. I mean, blaming it on parents don't come to conferences, well, if every experience you'd ever had walking in a school building was traumatic and negative, how likely are you going to want to be to come in that door? So I really like that piece of it, that we start to address that this is not just a issue around the learner, and that we have to do better than just blame the kid and where he came from, that we really need to be looking at how do we address the family and community as a whole so that they can be comfortable with how we help move families into the education system where they can be successful.
And then I guess I'll tack on to that. It's and also us as a system really looking at how do we shift our current practices to create the gateway in order for those families to feel like, they're welcomed into the system. So yeah, and I do believe it's a community effort. And just say like if just say for our 0 to 5 population, if like my mom's sick, if she can't go to the doctor or receive, receive dental benefits or anything like that, how am I going to get to school? How am I, like, how do I function in the system? And looking at those, I feel like those points of intersectionality of, like, health disparities, educational disparities, and how does that fundamentally impact particular populations within our state over and over and over again if we're not willing to address and look at some of these issues and the reasons why they're persistent. We have we're not addressing the holistic picture of our 0 to 5 learners. Okay.
I had a similar experience to Richard where I was getting really excited and underlining everything and then stopped underlining. But there were a couple that made me think and want to push on a little bit. And one was the very last one. We believe the rich history and culture of learners is a source of pride and an asset to embrace and celebrate. And I actually felt like that was a little soft. I feel in the work we do, we talk a lot about culture and family and history being resources for teaching and learning. And that, to me, is a little bit, would feel a little stronger. I feel like to talk about pride and celebration is kind of comfortable and easy for the system. You know, so you can have a Black History celebration, you can do heroes and holidays, but to really acknowledge that what kids and families come with is a resource for learning, for teaching. I feel like this is really, really strong. They're getting there, and I think that would be even stronger, push the system a little bit further. And then the other one was the last one on the previous page, where it kind of calls out some labels: at risk, underperforming, underrepresented, or minority. And I appreciate that they were called out as labels, and I would love to see some new language. Some of the families we work with on the Parent Advisory or Parent Accountability Council for Early Learning Multnomah talked about this exact thing in their guiding principles, where they said, you know, we don't accept the term at risk for our kids. Our kids are full of promise, and that was sort of the language that they proposed to be used for children of color, children who are, you know, under-resourced, disadvantaged, rather than these kind of negative labels that tend to kind of set you up for failure more than success. So I appreciate that, that they were called out, and I'd like to see us move towards more strength-based language.
A tool has been developed, the asset-based language tool. I mean, it's definitely still in this draft stage, and really looking at how we utilize it and how do we actually, like, for me, it's kind of like, how do we shift the definition? Because again, like, we can go from at-risk to urban youth, and then it will still have the same meaning. I mean, like, it's a shift in label, however, not a shift in, like, how are we viewing those children? This is not like the substitution or the synonym for this term. It's kind of like fundamentally kind of like getting back to that one that, like, around the rich history and culture of, like, our learners. It's kind of like, if we valued what they bring to the table, what would be different in our schools? Like, what would be different in our learning environments if we valued what our students, the rich cultural, linguistic resources that our children are bringing into the building? And I guess, like, for me, that really ties back into, like, the shifting of definition, because if it's a value to us, then we would interact with it differently rather than if it was a deficit kind of.
Years ago, I presented at a conference in Detroit, and the conference was the education of African American children placed at risk. And it changed the whole conversation because, of course, the question was, who's placing them at risk?
Ooh.
Yeah, and that's, you know, and I've done many workshops where I use that as part of, you know, children placed at risk. And so how are they being placed at risk? Who is doing it, either intentionally or, you know, unintentionally? You know, kids don't just show up in the world, you know, and have all these, I mean, there may be factors that contribute to them being, you know, treated a certain way, but somebody keeps that narrative going. Somebody keeps that, you know, that attitude. And children, like we look at the discriminatory discipline. Children who are being inequitably treated in terms of discipline are being placed at risk. They end up not wanting to come to school. Academically, they don't achieve because they're not in the classroom. So, I mean, it makes the labeling kind of, it's like a reverse thing. You know, the children are not at risk. There are things that are happening to them that place them in a space where they are vulnerable. And, but I agree, this labeling thing. And you know, people can say they're not using those labels, but their behaviors betray the fact that they still see these kids in a certain negative light. So.
I've been really interested in the focus goal, or like focus network terminology, because I like that that's more of a focuses on what we're doing, our behavior. We're focusing on this school. Like that's so much better to me than like underperforming.
Yeah, yeah.
Hey, if it's underperforming, let's
make it
pay attention to it and put resources there and actually focus our attention on what needs to be happening there that we're not doing. It's like not a perfect word, but I just like when I first started, I was like, oh, that's like such a relief that it's about our action as a community. So, as a positive action, not we put them at risk. Like, okay, do that.
And we have examples at our schools of things that happen where a kid who may not be very successful, we know what to do. Take the sports team. You know, coaches know what to do to get those kids to perform. You know, it's intentionality, it's engagement, it's putting in the time, it's having high expectations, you know, all of those things.
And congratulations.
And, reward, parent engagement.
A sense of community.
I've always said to principals, you know what? You ought to have parent-teacher conference during basketball games. At halftime, just stop everything because you got all the parents there. You know, I mean, it's just we know some of the things that we need to do, but for a number of reasons, we don't do.
Yeah.
Got an hour and a half of material and an hour to do it in.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So.
Okay.
Thank you. So I want us to, out loud, we're just going to read if I can have a volunteer, read the purpose of the OEIB equity lens on page 4, and then we're going to look at the last 2 sections of this document. Anyone would like to read this one? Thank you.
The purpose of the equity lens is to clearly articulate the shared goals we have for our state, the intentional investments we will make to reach our goals of equitable education system, and to create clear accountability structures to ensure that we are actively making progress and correcting where there is not progress. As the OEIB executes its charge to align and build a P20 education system, an equity lens will prove useful to ensure every learner is adequately prepared by educators focused on equity for meaningful contributions to society. The equity lens will confirm the importance of recognizing institutional and systemic barriers and discriminatory practices that have limited access for many students in the Oregon education system. The equity lens emphasizes underserved students such as out-of-school youth, English language learners, and students in some communities of color and some rural geographical locations, with a particular focus on racial equity. The result of creating a culture of equity will focus on the outcomes of academic proficiency, civic awareness, workplace literacy, and personal integrity. The system outcomes will focus on resource allocation, overall investments, hiring, and professional learning.
Thank you. So again, like if we connect that directly to our charge, I feel like that's kind of like the broad overview of like what this committee was charged with. Correct me if I'm wrong. That seems kind of like kind of what our committee has been charged with at the multitude of areas to address. And then for us, we decided to focus in on the grant and RFP process at the beginning. So on page 5, here's a series of questions. So I just want everyone to review the questions because I know there's a lot of familiarity in the room concerning the questions. And when we come back in January, we're going to be using these questions to overlay over the pathway that we select and see whether or not, you know, if we're living up to what's happening, you know, living up to our 8 questions within the equity lens. And then also, hopefully, as we're fleshing out the procedures, policies and procedures that we would like to recommend, really using this as the foundation of that work, so that we can have like kind of a compass guiding us as we're engaging in these conversations. And then a check for us to see, like, did we do what we said we were going to do, or is this going to help us produce what we said we wanted to produce?
Just a point of information, this particular section came much later.
Mm-hmm.
This was developed first, and I remember one particularly interesting equity subcommittee meeting with the finance part, and there were questions about, you know, how do we know, and, you know, it got to be a little contentious.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was a part of that group that went off and developed these questions, and it kind of helped to focus people more on just what does this mean in terms of applying it and aligning this lens with the work that we do. And I really like it, because I think it did help to clarify for many people just what do you do, what do you need to look at.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, how does it make you?
Yeah. And I think especially for, as we're looking at the RFP and the grant writing process, like, what tools can we develop from this that will help, you know, people like have that lens that we would like them to be filtering information through, specifically tied to that, so kind of make it a tad bit more real world in that application to the RFP and the grant writing process. And last but not least, for this document, page 6 and 7, it's a series of definitions. So I guess our homework from this session, I would like you to take an opportunity to read through these definitions and then reread the actual lens to make sure that, you know, the lens in which you're viewing this document is aligning with the definitions that have been provided for us at the end of this document. And I also think that clarifies a lot of questions that are asked about, like, what do they mean by this, as we're utilizing or reviewing the equity lens. So that's our equity lens. I know it took a tad bit longer than I should have known. I should have time on that.
It's hard to know what's going to be the triggers of conversation. I mean, this is obviously always going to be,
Yeah, a big one. But yeah, so that's the lens in which we're operating in this committee. That's been like kind of laid out through our charge of the through our charge that our committee's been charged to do. Okay. So we have 2 work session items that I'm going to propose since we are running short on time. We take about 10 to 15 minutes to talk about the work session 1, because we did a larger overview last time in the meeting. So I just want to make sure that everyone have received the equity work plan document through that the Early Learning Division has been working on in order to actualize the equity work within the division, and have an opportunity to review them at short leisure with a kind of a large overview of what the work's been done, so that we can say whether or not we think that this work is kind of living up to our equity lens. And I know this is a short time, so I'm going to propose to our chair that once we have an opportunity just to review this document during this piece, that we can have kind of email exchange around whether or not people can vote, whether or not they see this as a document that reflects kind of initial first steps for the division in order to engage in this work, and any recommendations they would like to see added or discussed at our next upcoming meeting. So to delay the decision that's been outlined on the actual document until a later time period.
So we are looking at
So we're just taking, I'm just going to do a large, yes, we're just going to do a large, I'm just going to do a large work plan. Yes, we talked about it last meeting. Yeah. So we're just going to do. No worries. The division, the early learning division took on like this call to action in a major way and decided to say like, okay, let's walk the talk. Let's do an organizational self-assessment developed by the Coalition of Communities of Color to see kind of where we're at in 9 domains concerning being a culturally responsive organization. Also, from Ms. Joyce's analogy, there's 9 domains, and we can't take all the pills at one time. We're going to kill ourselves. I'm going to be using that analogy for the rest of my days. We identified 4 particular areas that the division was like, this is our starting point in order to engage in this work. And then each, from those 4 areas, 4 teams were developed to look at, how do we make this happen, and what are those, what are the steps for us to make them happen? So for breakthrough team number 1, they specifically looked at, I'm just going to read the strategy, anti-bias LED staff, contractors, and grantees to create a positive anti-racist, anti-bias, anti-privilege environment within the Early Learning Council, Early Learning Division, and the Early Learning Hubs, and provider organizations that promote knowledge, acceptance, and inclusion and respect. So from that overarching theme, this work team identified a series of recommendations in order to make this happen. From these recommendations from all the teams, the division hopes, through the help of our project manager, to sequence these kind of at steps. To say, if the early learning division is adequately moving through these steps, then we should start seeing changes if we're consistent with what we're doing. In order to develop that consistency, we also need to develop the policies and the procedures that would have to be in place for us to hold ourselves accountable and also create that culture of consistency around the work. You can see that this particular work plan has components that were inwardly facing around kind of like policies, procedures, how are we defining this, what are the shifts that we need to make in the organization concerning our workforce, and then also outwardly facing, how are we engaging with our contractors and our grantees to ensure that, as an arm of the division, the work that's happening is reflective of, what we're charged to do as an overall division. Work team number 2 specifically is focusing on a culturally relevant verbal and written communication. So this is an inward, extward, or internal, external facing kind of one, where we're looking at, as a division, what are we doing to be more culturally responsive when we're developing materials for our providers, for the community in which we serve. A case in point, we're really dissecting our translation services right now, and we kind of identified the translators that we currently have with the work that we were receiving from them was not adequate, and we were having so many problems around having to retranslate it and kind of send it to a different person to have it translated, that in order for us to be equitable in ensuring that first time around that our families and providers are receiving material that actually makes sense through our translation services, we're going through a process of kind of restructuring how do we submit our translations, what information we're providing them so that we're clear on what we want, and also resources for them so that they can be clear on the product that we want to receive back and the quality in which that is. So we're doing that for English, Spanish, Vietnamese, Cantonese, and Vietnamese, and we're going through. We're not rebidding; it's a vetting process because the state already has contracts with multiple other translation services to see which translation service or services can provide us with what we need in order to meet our business and our moral obligation to the families and communities in which we're serving.
So this is probably a conversation for bigger, and for all documents, like including Office of Child Care, so like if a provider gets a letter, it'll be in there like first language or first language.
I think ideally, though.
Ideally.
That's the goal.
Yeah, because like we also, as we're going through this process, like just say like when we're going through the Office of Child Care, and we're like, oh, these documents are translated in English, Russian, and Spanish, but not Chinese or Cantonese or Vietnamese. You know, it's like, oh, we didn't catch that. So it's kind of like even going through that process. So utilizing that lens as a way to be like, are we serving these particular needs?
Yeah. And trying to prioritize which ones you need first.
And that's where like the sequencing, like all four of these plans, like they're being sequenced together. So it's not like, oh, we're going to do work team 1 and then 2, 3, and 4. It's kind of like, oh, this one from 1 and 4 has happened prior to this objective from 2 or 3 to happen. So now that's the that's the heavy lift at this point in time. Okay. Work through number 3. Or breakthrough team number 3, their focus was accurate, accessible, convenient, and comprehensive data, which, as you know, within our charge is kind of like a major thing. So in our upcoming meeting, my goal is over the next month to sequence, again, like what we're doing within the equity breakthrough work to our charge to say like, okay, here's the current work that's being developed around, you know, Expo data collection. Here's the information that we have, so that, you know, we can identify like gaps and loopholes of information that we would like, information that we need, and really making sure that the information that we're receiving is, you know, valid and useful information. So this work team, I'm going to tell you right now, you can go point by point, but Ronnie Pham and Rita Loop did like the most detailed oriented plan possible, like individual steps.
Are they programmers?
No, but they worked with IT. So literally like this one is like you can totally see like the data like technical piece coming out.
That is so small.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm like, take my glasses off.
I know, right? So this is a team that's really currently looking at our current data systems, and we currently have there's a project, the ELC project, which is supposed to help us bridge all of our data systems together, so we have a cohesive individual place where we house our data, so that we can make sure that the data is going in correctly. We're defining our terms consistently across the board so that we can have that baseline to assess what we need next. And then our last team, breakthrough team number 4, for the stage of our work, they looked at diverse and inclusive early learning system workplace, leadership, staff, contractors, and early learning providers. So we're looking at it says train and provide ongoing opportunities for professional development for the ELD staff, and then also train and provide technical assistance to contractors and early learners providers. So it's an internal and external piece, with the full acknowledgement that like as a system we will not grow if we also do not take on this work as well. So you can see in components of all the work plans is internally facing and externally facing, in order to provide us with a what do you call that? A baseline to work from, because after we completed the equity self-assessment, we scored 0s and 1s in every category. So again, as an organization, like really looking at our score, and then from the equity self-assessment, utilizing the protocol that the Coalition of Community Color also developed to help us create our initial work plans, really helped us as we're going across this. And hopefully by our midpoint of next year, we're moving towards 3s and 4s with the ultimate goal. We're striving for that 5, in order to continuously working to reach the 5 at the end, the lower end, but also acknowledging the fact that these amount of changes they're major, and we're only on 4 of a total 9 possible areas to be enacting change within our organization as well. So if you haven't had the opportunity to, please go through. And if there's kind of areas where you're just like, I don't understand, or, this doesn't quite resonate with me, or please let us know for our next meeting. So the action that will be taking place next meeting would be voting whether or not this is, whether or not we would validate this plan for the early learning division to continue with the current work that has been developed from this work, or any recommendations that we would like to add to it.
So do you want us to email you in the interim our feedback recommendations, or just come ready with them next time?
I'm gonna send out a link. I want to do like a Google Doc, so we can kind of organize all this, any recommendations, and then next meeting, if we have quorum, vote to validate the work plan. So I know that was short. Are there any questions or concerns?
Lillian, this is Terry. You said you're going to send out a Google Doc or something with the work plan, because I don't see that I have a copy of it.
Okay, definitely I will send it out. For our previous meeting, I sent out a copy of the work plan, but you weren't on the list yet. But I'll definitely send you out a document with all important documents concerning the equity work plan.
Thanks.
Let me write that note down. Okay. And the last thing on our agenda for today, so transitioning to work session number 2, we're looking at kind of the goals and the grantee and RFP process. So hopefully at 11, one of our coworkers, Sonia, will be calling in to kind of give us additional background information about the grant and RFP process. But prior to that, I want us to have an opportunity to look at our charge. So this is document. Does everyone have a copy of this? So at the bottom of our charge, we have the section that's titled the review of the grant making and a request for proposals. And then it states that serve as an advisory to the ELC/ELD in the creation and structure of grants and requests for proposals to avoid unintentional barriers for diverse communities in accessing funding opportunities. Responsibilities include working with program staff to craft a set of RFP/grant application questions for use in all ELC/ELD funding opportunities, review specific RFPs and grant applications as they are written, and a member of the the Equity Implementation Committee shall serve on each RFP or grant award committee as reviewers of proposals when they come in. So my interpretation of this is we're developing a series of kind of policies and procedures that's going to help us create a seamless integration of kind of what we would recommend, kind of the inclusion of the equity lens into the work that's currently happening or will in the future will be happening in regards to grants and RFPs. Sonia, is that you? No.
Her name is up there. Yeah. She's going to be on camera.
I don't know. Perhaps. Yeah.
So before an RFP is released, we're to look at it, is that what?
Yeah, so from the charge it says review specific RFP/grant applications as they are written.
Is that first does that imply that we would draft like a set of questions that are equity related that would be in every RFP?
Mhm. Yeah.
That would have
No, that hasn't. I mean, like I think as current RFPs or RFAs are being produced, like there's like if we're utilizing the equity lens, what would be questions that we will need to ask in order to actualize our work within this document? But there's like no formal like framework or boilerplate that states like here are the specific questions that have to be asked. For example, for the mixed delivery preschool, there's like kind of a boilerplate of like, here are all the things that regardless of what you're doing, you have to answer these questions. So I'm foreseeing it as kind of like a set of questions such as those, and then like really customizing it for whatever process it is, like for what grant or RFP or RFA it is. I don't think there can be just like the list of questions that's going to apply to everything. It's going to help us get to all the answers that you all would like to answer as a committee.
I mean, is there a suggestion to maybe start with the equity lens questions and then maybe format per proposal?
Yeah.
So I have a question about working with program staff. Would program staff take an initial stab at trying to develop some questions, and then we would then look at them and provide feedback? Okay.
Right, because I think the questions probably have to be based on the RFP, so there'd be no way to do that initial work first without doing bringing them over. Did you get them?
Hello? Do we have a new caller? Sonia?
Hi. Yeah, this is Sonia. Just calling in.
Hi, Sonia. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm going to put myself on mute until you're ready for me.
Oh, we are ready. See, you called in at the perfect time. Like, I'm not even lying. We timed this so well for you to come in. So I guess just to catch you up, Sonia, or where we're at in the meeting. As a component of the charge for the Early Learning Council Equity Implementation Committee, it states that we serve as an advisory to the ELC, ELD, and the creation and structure of grants and requests for proposals to avoid unintentional barriers for diverse communities in accessing funding opportunities. Responsibilities include working with program staff to craft a set of RFP/grant application questions for use in all ELC/ELD funding opportunities, review specific RFPs/grant applications as they are written, and last but not least, a member of the Equity Implementation Committee shall serve on each RFP or grant reward committee as a reviewer of proposals when they come in. So we're like really kind of entering into that component of our conversation for today.
Okay, so I was asked to develop this grid that shows the process for when we recompete program services. My intent, hopefully today, is to get your input on where in the process the equity view or the equity questions are input into either a contract or a formal RFP. Do you all have copies of this document?
No. Is it the one pager that you mentioned?
I think so. 1 second. Let me see if I can pull it up.
Okay.
Sonia, if you can provide some just additional background information concerning kind of the work that you were tasked to do within this process, that would be great. And I'm pulling this up so that we can see on the screen.
Okay, I didn't hear the last part of what you said.
If you want to give a little, hi Sonia, it's Carol. If you want to give a little background on how the process has worked originally and how it came to be that we are now inserting equity into this RFP process.
Okay. I met with Kim and Nikisha because they were tasked with developing a process for the Early Learning Council on when we recompete program services. And this would mean Healthy Families Oregon, the Oregon Pre-K programs, which actually are grants, not contracts, or any other large program for services, not operational programs, only services programs. So rather than just doing a step-by-step narrative document, I thought the best way to do this would be to put it in graph form so that you could see the process of developing a final contract. And there are two routes that it takes. Either it's over 150,000 or it's not over 150,000, and then there are two different paths that it takes after that point. So I divided the grid into a contractor processes at the top. The next was contract administrator, what their responsibilities are, ODE procurement office, then the requester, which is the ELD manager, which would be a program manager, Department of Justice, the Department of Administrative Services, State Procurement Office, the Early Learning Council, and the Budget and Accounting Unit. So I color-coded them so that you could see where the responsibilities lie for each one of these areas. So the first thing that happens is a contract administrator. We'll just use Relief Nurseries as an example. The contracts are going to expire. Well, this is probably a bad example because we don't really recompete those services. Maybe the preschool promise program would be a good one to start with. So the decision is made that we're going to put these contracts out for open competition. So the discussion happens at the management team, which is the very first part of this grid. And then the discussion moves to the Early Learning Council and their advice on recompeting program services. So that goes back up to the contract administrator. They're given permission to go ahead and start the process. So they complete what's called a Form B with a statement of work, which is what SOW means, is statement of work. And the Form B is then reviewed and approved by the program manager, given back to the contract manager, and then it's submitted to Oregon Department of Education Procurement Office, who then takes it to ODE budget, and our budget analyst looks at it, makes sure that it has the correct funding index and that there's money enough for the final negotiated contracts. Then it goes back to budget, and then the question, there's a decision now.
Hold it. This is kind of not working for, it's not working for me. I'm just,
as I'm writing it, like that. It goes where, and then they look up at that.
Okay, I'm having a really.
I don't know that I need to see this.
Yeah, I think the question is, where in the process, and Sonia, correct me if I'm wrong, I think the question is, where in the process would you, as a committee, prefer or suggest that equity be injected? Do you want it at the very start?
I thought my whole point was just, or my purpose today was just to show you what the process is, and then you would make the decision on where the input would be. Okay, so that's a different question.
Absolutely. And I think you're absolutely right, Sonia, and you're not wrong. That is exactly what we wanted you to do. I think that it's just, if you could see the looks around the table, you would know why we stopped, because it's a lot, it's confusing, all the steps are confusing. So I think maybe returning to the original.
And the other thing, Sonia, we don't have hard copies. We're looking at it across the room at a screen. Yeah. It's a beautiful chart.
Okay, so if you're looking for my suggestion on where questions should be, it would be right up front with the creation of the solicitation or the contract request.
Yeah.
So that the questions are actually part of the Form B submission to Department of Education's procurement office.
Okay, so right at the beginning.
So right at the beginning, and I can add that into this process, not a problem. I actually left a lot of white space so that I could insert different things.
Can I ask a question one step before that, where there's the diamond that says recompete program contracts with a question mark? The decision of whether or not to recompete, would the contract either be opened up for competition or just renewed? Is that what that question means? Like, are the alternatives to recompete it or renew with existing providers? Is that what that question is?
If we're going to renew with the existing providers, then it wouldn't even be on this chart. This is only for recompeting program contracts.
Okay, so why is there, I guess I'm wondering.
Why it has a question mark is that there's a decision being made. So a triangle box means there's a decision being made. So the contract administrator is saying these contracts are going to expire, we need to recompete, and that goes to the program manager, ELD management team, which they discuss and then transmit that information to the Early Learning Council.
And if they said we're not going to recompete, what would that look like?
Then we would just continue to contract with the current programs.
That's where I was going. So I feel like there's an equity question there because the existing...
I'm so sorry. We are having an emergency, and I'll have to leave it right now. Thank you so much. Take care. This is Nicole. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Oh, you could hear the...
She was having an emergency.
Fire alarm.
So I feel like there's an equity question there for consideration because I feel like part of making that decision, we should be considering whether or not the existing providers are aligned with the equity plans or the way that those resources are being distributed into the community meets our goals. So I feel like the question comes in multiple places.
That makes sense to me because they haven't theoretically been vetted through this process we're talking about now.
Okay, I cannot hear.
Oh, I'm talking over it now. Okay, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right. So
I did hear that you said that the equity discussion or any kind of equity question should be part of this red box for the ELC discussion and advice on recompeting.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. So as a result of that discussion, then hopefully there are really good questions that will be posed of potential bidders. And those questions would then be part of this Form B that goes to the Department of Education Procurement Office.
She's saying that even for just renewals, what kind of process are we doing for renewals to make sure that the equity lens is applied to renewals as well? And if equity isn't a part of those programs that are just receiving renewals, how do we fix that? Or how does that drive the decision to recompete? Yeah. So I feel like there are two steps that I see at the very, very beginning. So in deciding whether or not to recompete, whether to recompete or renew,
Okay.
there's an equity consideration there. And if the decision is to recompete, then there are questions that go into the solicitation or contract request form.
Okay. I'm taking notes as you're talking.
I'm sure there are other points in the process.
May I ask a question? This is Richard. May I ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
I don't have the document that you guys are looking at. I looked through all the stuff that I have here, so I'm not able to really participate.
I'm sending it to you right now.
Sorry, Richard.
Okay.
Sorry, Richard.
No, that's okay. That's
I forgot
okay.
you wrote it. Not in a, that sounds horrible.
So what I'm hearing is at the beginning of this process that it's twofold. It's recompeting and also renewing. And it doesn't matter if it's recompeting or renewing, it still goes through the same process except that there's not an RFP. It just goes to contracts. So that process is also on here.
Well, I guess there's a piece just say, so if this is a scenario that I'm thinking about, if we're currently working with with a contractor, however, they were selected under a different guard, so they did not go through the vetting process. We did not, do as strong of a equity vetting that we would like to do with them. They're coming up, and we have a decision to either renew with them or to recompete. I think the question is, like, prior to us even considering renewing someone's contract, we have to develop a process to ensure that they are meeting our standards and working towards becoming equitable organizations that providing equitable outcomes. And if they are not doing that, like, what's the stop button so that we can identify whether or not we need to recompete that contract?
I think that the part before you want to try to recompete is when the contractor submits their proposal. Because at that point, there'll have to be another set of questions when all the contracts come in, if those folks are passing muster on the equity piece.
Okay.
Oh, for renewal instead of recompeting.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Lillian, this is Carrie. At some point, besides the piece about competing or renewing contract and does the contractor meet the equity lens if we decide to just renew, there's a piece of that decision, if it really is a decision and not a mandate, to renew or recompete, because sometimes it's a mandate that they have to be recompeted, that just that decision is a decision that sometimes can cause inequity, because especially in rural communities, there is not the capacity to respond to the equity questions that there are in other places. And we need to make sure that communities are not going to lose resources that they've been depending on because we haven't given them the capacity to meet the equity lens. We can't just imagine that because we created this lens, that across the state there's capacity to implement it and to answer to it. And so sometimes very small rural communities are put at a disadvantage just by going to the recompete process. And I think we need to be conscious of that as we're moving through these new processes?
Terry, this is Carol. I think that's a totally fair thing to think about. And so then I guess my follow-up question is, if we have a set of questions that go with the RFP and folks can't meet them, is that a deterrent for us then to select them? So what I'm asking is, do the questions mean a mandate, or are they just a lens for us to make a better decision, but not a hard and fast decision based on the questions? Right, that's a great question.
Well, I think one thing is, in the equity lens, it talks about taking a look at challenges and barriers. Mm-hmm. And so as a funding source, if a client or a grantee indicates that there are some barriers or challenges to them meeting some of the equity lens expectations, then I think what that says to me is that we need to work with them to see if maybe, say for example, the barrier might be inequitable access. There might be some barriers there, transportation, for example. So how do we work with the grantee to help them address those challenges? Because if we don't, we will continue to have inequitable systems. Right.
So would this be just say like we definitely need to flesh this out, but just say within within certain cases, within probably all cases, like if there's particular conditions that we have to place on, just say like, okay, you identified these barriers to service, and there's no other service providers that we can see within your area to, that could, serve to the level in which we're looking for at this point in time. What's the supports that we're putting into place to help you get there?
Well, I think most people kind of know what the challenges are. And unfortunately, the pattern has been people have been funded, and you know that they're not going to overcome those challenges with the money that you give them.
Right, they're just doing the service.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So does it mean that, because this whole equity piece works on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, well, you all funded us, and you knew that we didn't have the capacity to overcome this challenge or this barrier. That we needed either additional resources, we needed technical assistance. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where the rubber really meets the road, is how does the system help to enable grantees become more equitable where there are clear barriers or challenges that are beyond their capacity to change.
So is that a question in the
in
the set of questions? What barriers or what additional supports would you need in order to
overcome your identified barrier?
Yeah.
Well, and then I think also.
So, may I ask a question on this? This is Richard, and my question is I'm kind of recalling the scenario where if you're in a rural area, there may not be enough competition to fulfill a equitable requirement or to answer an equitable question. And in those kind of scenarios, I'm curious if we can then ask them to be part of the equity lens in maybe a different way that reflects their commitment to equity when those things are not feasible. So not just going, okay, you don't have any competition, so we're just going to go forward with you, but okay, so instead asking, here is our beliefs, and we want to understand what your belief system is. And at least then getting some sort of narrative from those persons as to how they are implementing an equity lens in their work, even when there's not competition available.
Mm-hmm.
I think question number
number two is as well. Does the decision being made ignore or worsen existing disparities or produce other unintended consequences? What is the impact on eliminating the opportunity gap? So I see that as part of the, okay, so you don't fit this box or you don't meet these areas, but how does this decision create a gap then if we remove this resource or don't allow you to have this resource?
Or even, and well, in question 6, how will you modify or enhance your strategies to ensure each learner and community's individual and cultural needs are met? So if there is a gap in teachers who can't be reflective, or transportation that can't be available, what they can offer some strategies. It's not like we're letting them off the hook. We're not denying them money either, but we're asking them to think it through, and maybe that's where we throw in some technical assistance. Like we will help you think some of these things through.
Yeah, sometimes it's just helping people to think through some alternatives to, climbing that mountain that looks like it's not going to get to the top. Sometimes you do have to provide some additional input, because the way things are, that's why we're at now. We continue to fund programs that don't make a difference, for the students who really need, or the families that really need.
That is my concern. That's why I wanted to go back to that first question, because if we continue to just renew, because that's who's doing it, that's who's been doing it, that's who has the experience, if that experience is a positive for kids of color, it's not moving the dial, then we need to reconvene.
Something else.
Yeah, we need to do something else. And for me, in good faith on this committee, it's not good enough to say we're working on it. It's not good enough. I mean, if an organization or a provider has been receiving money to serve a community and has not done it well, then they should not continue to do it. Unless there's absolutely no other organization that can do it, then they need to be on some sort of plan or.
Right, I was going to say, should we do you answered question number 6, you've given us your strategies, you now have 12 months, you now have 18 months to come back and say.
But if it's a competitive environment, there's no reason not to recompete in that scenario.
Right.
To me. If the organization's not been performing, our kids can't wait.
Right, like Portland and Salem, maybe they have options, but if we're talking Pendleton, how do we adjust to make sure folks are making the changes without taking away their only resource?
And how can maybe ODE also partner organizations and provide financial support to an organization who's doing well to mentor an organization that has some goals, if they have serve a similar population, or so that there can be some community-driven promising practice that's supported, so to cross-sector.
I think that's more of a role of a hub.
But it's not in your hub.
Right. So does that come in
another county?
So does that come in right at the developing contract box? So say we've got that scenario and we're saying, okay, you're not there yet. We want to help you get there. In the contract, we put in something that says, work with your hub or work with your neighboring organization, and we'll give you 18 months. Is that where that would come in?
But the other issue that comes up, does the other organization then need some assistance?
Yes, they need.
In terms of, if you're going to be mentoring and working, you may need some additional support. So it has to be some type of memorandum of agreement as to, what is the impact going to be on the organization who is going to be providing some type of support.
Right. And if the hub ups enough in covering what we need them to be covering.
Right. That's why maybe thinking of technical assistance as sort of a menu. Maybe ODE provides it, maybe the hub provides it, maybe another organization provides it, and we contract with that organization.
Right. Yeah, that ODE would go to another group and say, look, we have an organization here, they're having some challenges. You have successfully demonstrated that you can provide them with some assistance. And we're willing to give you X number of dollars, to do this. But and once again, you need to hold them accountable. You know, I want to see a plan. Right. I want to see how we hold you accountable for doing the work with this other group. So it all gets back to accountability, you know, throughout this system, and that's one of the challenges. People have not been held accountable to the degree that it would have impact on the community.
So, I was just going to say we have 4 minutes.
We have, we have 4 minutes left. So again, thank you so much, Sonia. And definitely, I think I'm going to be working with you to get just a better. Can we get a copy of that? I can send it. I can send to everybody to get just a better view of the entire contracting process. So like we're entering into like the the recompeting component of contracts, but just to have a larger holistic view for the entire committee, and then working closer to you to identify the points of like how we're embedding the equity lens, what's the checks and balances, and what could they look like, so we can provide, so we can bring back pathways to the committee for January's meeting, and then me sending them out prior to January's meeting so that everyone can review them, so we can have a rich discussion in here.
So does every program follow this contracting process? Is this department-wide, or is this? Well,
this is just for recompeting. So there may be there's additional contracts. Definitely, like if we have a new contract or we have a new grant, and then someone enters that process, this would be different. I mean, like I feel like there's components that would be similar, but it's going to be a different start point and an end point. So like for me, so just to get a larger holistic view of the contracting process, so that we know where this point is entering, where we're entering in at this point in the discussion. So for next meeting, reviewing the equity lens and having an opportunity to reading the definitions and kind of reviewing the equity lens again, so that we're just have a very clear view on that. For the equity breakthrough work plans, we're going to have an opportunity to review those again, identify any additional recommendations, or kind of like if we're totally off the path, like what's your suggestion for getting us back on the path, and me sending out a Google Doc so people can list out their recommendations or changes or improvements to that, and then making a decision on whether or not we're validating that next meeting. And then for the grant and RFP process, having a larger holistic view of it, identifying the points of that we see where the equity lens should be in order to develop from the beginning to the end of this process, and then also kind of what's the checks and balances and what they can look like as we're identifying those components through the beautiful graph that Sonia has developed for us. And thank you so much. So that's all I have for right now.
We have to do all that by the next meeting?
Huh?
We have to do all that by the next meeting? You just said a whole mouthful, and I got it.
I will detail it in the email.
Okay.
I just wanted to just wrap up. But
it is coloring.
All right, I it's 11:30, and it is 11:30.
Yes. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great day. If there's any questions or concerns, please send us an email. And if you currently have Terry's email, I will also forward that to everyone as well.
Thank you, Lillian.
Thanks, everybody else.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.